So first, let's talk about what you found on the ground. You were just recently there. And then this global set of countries that continue to pummel Syria.
And the thing that you really need to know to put this in even more perspective is that, yes, there's been a spike in deaths and in civilian casualties. There was a period of, I think just from last week, from Monday to Friday, there were 230 people killed, civilians, mostly civilians, and 1,000 casualties. So that's a lot, but actually over the last, most of the last 7 years, those kinds of death tolls are happening all the time, maybe at a slower pace, but in these places, civilians are under attack constantly, and hospitals are under attack, and there's a very difficult problems in getting humanitarian aid access, and it's happening in many places in Syria by many sides. But the Syrian government's attempts to take back rebel-held areas have been particularly characterized lately by an intensified bombing campaign that has taken a very heavy toll on civilians who are already tired, malnourished, maybe displaced already several times. Some of them are stuck behind siege boundaries. So it's really been a tough week.
Well, and most of the media attention in the United States have focused on the war against ISIS. And once the declaration that or most of the ISIS enclaves had been defeated, the attention has largely dropped from the U.S. media. What has happened since the so-called defeat of ISIS? How has the war in Syria transformed?
Well, you're exactly right. The U.S. Focus has tended to be on ISIS within a framework of the so-called war on terror. But the war in Syria did not begin with ISIS, and it's not going to end with ISIS. First of all, I think it's probably a mistaken mission accomplished moment to claim that ISIS has actually been defeated, because many fighters have gone underground, and their ideology, of course, is continuing to assert itself in some places. But since then, what the relative defeat of ISIS has unleashed is the ability of the Syrian government and its allies, Russia and Iran, to turn their attention fully back to fighting the rebels who have already been on the run. And it's very complicated because there are different patches of areas around the country that are not connected to each other, that are controlled by different rebel groups, Islamist groups, some Qaeda-linked groups. These are not even contiguous patches of territory, so you're talking about many wars within a war. But what's happened is that now the government is able to focus on those battles, and in a sense, the rest of the world cares less about that than they cared about ISIS, because they saw ISIS as a threat to themselves.
So the beginning of this conversation, we talked about just what happened among the major countries that are bombing Syria. Again, Israel shooting down what it says is an Iranian drone, then attacking what it called the command and control center in Syria for the drone. Then one of the Israeli F-16 military jets were down by the Syrian government anti-aircraft missile. Saturday's event marking the first Israeli jet shot down since the 1980s. Also believed to be the first time Israel carried out an attack in Syria in a site where Iranian troops were present. Can you talk about the significance of all of this?
Yes, this brings us to the second consequence of the end of the main part of the territorial fight against Islamic State. Many different international powers, as well as the Syrian government and some of its opponents within Syria, were all against each other in a way, but united against the Islamic State. And they launched competing campaigns to defeat the Islamic State, racing one another to take its territory. Once Islamic State was largely driven out of territory in Syria, those different combatants are finding that their conflicting interests are coming to the fore again. So you see now Turkey going against Syrian Kurdish groups. You see even clashes, even confrontations between Turkey and the United States over the United States backing for Kurdish militias that Turkey sees as terrorists and that the United States sees as its best ally in Syria. There's a big question. The United States has upset both allies and enemies by saying that it wants to now remain in the areas that were taken by the U.S.-backed militias in the northeast of Syria. Israel has been bombing targets in Syria throughout the war with relative impunity. This is the first time that the Syrian government has managed to shoot down a jet. You also have Syria's allies, Russia and Iran, which have differing views about how exactly the future of Syria should be laid out. And I'm probably forgetting to mention somebody, but all of these, I feel that we may be getting to a phase in the Syrian war where all the foreign interveners are turning it into an arena to fight amongst each other, really regardless of what Syrians want or the effect on Syrians. And unfortunately, that could go on for a long time.
We're going to go to break, then come back to this discussion where we'll also be joined, in addition to Anne Bernard, the New York Times bureau chief in Beirut, Lebanon, by Yassin Al-Sadi, the Syrian-Canadian researcher. This is Democracy Now! Back with them in a moment. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, we return now to Syria. The United Nations is warning that civilians are being killed and wounded at a rapid pace amidst an escalation in the Syrian government bombing against a rebel-held enclave of eastern Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus. At least 200 civilians have been reportedly killed in the last week alone. We're joined now by Yassin Al-Sadi, a Syrian-Canadian writer, researcher, and still with us is Anne Bernard from the New York Times, bureau chief in Beirut, Lebanon. Her recent article is titled, "It's Hard to Believe, but Syria's war is getting even worse." Anne, I wanted to begin again with you to ask you about the role of Hezbollah, because obviously Hezbollah was widely involved in the fighting in Syria, has undoubtedly grown stronger as a result. And could you talk about its role, particularly in the conflict and the concerns of Israel over the growth of Hezbollah?
Well, Hezbollah entered the war overtly and in a sort of, in the manner of an expeditionary force in 2013. And that was a big surprise because this is a group that was founded to fight Israeli occupation of the south of Lebanon, not to go and help put down uprisings in other countries. But nonetheless, because of their close alliance with Damascus and Tehran, Hezbollah entered the war first in areas that made sense in a way for it in a local sense, because they first focus on areas near the Lebanese border, on the shrine of Sayyidah Zainab near Damascus, which is particularly revered by Shiites. But gradually their role expanded. They were a much more effective pound-for-pound force than the Syrian military, and they ended up helping out in battles steadily spreading across the country. Nobody imagined a few years ago that Hezbollah would end up fighting in Aleppo, near the Iraqi border, in northern Syria, all the way in southern Syria. Now, the southern Syria part is the biggest issue because, of course, there's always been conflict between Hezbollah and Israel and tensions there across the Lebanese border. But now Hezbollah is entrenching itself increasingly in areas in the southern part of Syria, bordering the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, the portion that's held by the Israelis. So that's obviously of a big concern to Israel. At the same time, the Syrian government accuses Israel of trying to increase its own buffer zone there, and that's been a real flashpoint. And that really exploded on Saturday, not as badly as it could have been, though, because it seems to have been contained for now to this one incident. There's also, of course, an Iranian presence around. Iranian advisors are deeply involved throughout the war effort on the Syrian government side. So that's something that Israel has been trying to counter throughout the conflict, and I think we're only going to see more tensions around that.
War in Syria has been ongoing for years, with many different factions involved, with several nations supporting non-state actors in proxy wars that have also resulted in direct conflict between nations. The country remains a war-torn and divided nation, with outside special interests being the main driving factor that have essentially destroyed the country and much of its infrastructure. The so-called Western coalition headed up by the United States have multiple objectives in Syria, among them removing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power, in addition to securing Syrian natural resources such as oil and gas reserves, all under the false pretext of fighting the war on terror. So far, they have not been able to remove Assad from power, but according to the Secretary General of the Lebanese Hezbollah, the United States is currently attempting to take control of Syria's oil and gas reserves east of the Euphrates, in the predominantly Kurdish-held area of Syria. The Kurds are just one faction that the United States is backing, while the U.S. has been able to establish several illegal military bases in this region. In a major development that is not getting much coverage in the press, Russia and Syria have signed a major energy deal giving the Russians control of Syria's oil and gas reserves under the condition that the badly damaged infrastructure be rebuilt and restored. Russia's efforts to rebuild Syria's infrastructure will no doubt be a dangerous and very large-scale operation costing tens of billions of dollars, which includes restoring pipelines and other infrastructure. While Russia appears to have won the war for Syria's oil and gas reserves on paper, the Western nations have a history of not playing by the rules and may target and or sabotage the Russian operations while defending and trying to expand their stronghold east of the Euphrates, which is evident by the recent U.S. airstrikes killing pro-Assad forces, including Russian contractors in the region.
We will use force if our troops are threatened, and that was clearly the case.
While it's too early to tell which factions will come out on top, as the war in Syria is far from over, as tensions and bloodshed continue to increase, many would argue that perpetual war has no winners. One thing is for certain, there are victims, many of them innocent, who pay the heaviest price, and that is the Syrian people, as countless lives have been lost at the hands of all sides who are engaged in this conflict.
One of the problems, not specifically on this issue, just in general, let's put it this way, money trumps peace sometimes.
Over the course of just 8 days, a kind of mini world war played out inside Syria. Conflict intensified, involving major players like the US, Russia, Turkey, Israel, and Iran. Kurds, rebel groups, and forces loyal to Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad also got involved. Here's how one of the most chaotic weeks in the Syrian war unfolded. Saturday, February 3rd. A Russian airplane is shot down over Idlib province, apparently by anti-Assad rebels. Sunday, February 4th. Pro-Assad forces bomb the same province. A suspected chemical attack is reported by doctors in rural Idlib. Rebels blame the Syrian regime. Monday, February 5th. Russians launch airstrikes targeting eastern Ghouta, a rebel-held area near the capital Damascus, leaving more than 100 dead over the next several days. Tuesday, February 6th. The UN calls for a ceasefire, saying Syria faces an extreme humanitarian crisis. Syrians say Israeli warplanes fire missiles near Damascus. Fighting continues between Turks and Kurds in the Kurdish-majority region of Afrin, and Turkey restates that from there it will push 80 miles further into Manbij, a Kurdish-held city with a U.S. military presence. Wednesday, February 7th. Top U.S. generals visit an American base near Manbij, in what was seen as a direct message to Turkey, a NATO ally, to keep its distance. Pro-Assad forces attack U.S.-backed fighters in eastern Syria. The U.S. launches a rare air assault in response. At least 100 pro-Assad troops, including Russian mercenaries, are presumed dead. Thursday, February 8th. Rebels and civilians continue to suffer withering air assaults in eastern Ghouta, some of the worst of the 7-year civil war. Saturday, February 10th. An Israeli F-16 crashes in northern Israel after coming under heavy fire by the Syrian military. Israel said it had shot down an Iranian drone that entered its airspace after being launched from Syria. A Turkish helicopter is also shot down by Kurdish fighters. 2 pilots are killed, and 7 other Turks die in fighting. It's the highest one-day death toll since the Turkish incursion in Syria. All of this played out against the backdrop of the continuing U.S. mission to defeat ISIS, a fight that remains ongoing.
The Syrian Arab Army, SAA, and its allies continue preparations for a ground operation against militants in Damascus's eastern Ghouta. Now, government forces and warplanes target fortified positions, HQs, and weapon depots belonging to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ara al-Sham, and their allies. pro-militant sources and the mainstream media have already started a propaganda campaign targeting the SAA as the only side responsible for civilian casualties in the area. Various sources provide different numbers, but the key thing in these reports is that the number is high. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, will be exterminated if powers having influence over the group fail to discipline it. That is why we are asking our Western colleagues, who have leverage on Jabhat al-Nusra, to make the effort to discipline this structure as far as the resolution of humanitarian problems is concerned. Otherwise, it will be destroyed, Lavrov said. The Turkish armed forces, TAF, and the Free Syrian Army, FSA, captured the villages of Ikidam, Kudar Kuwi, Haji Kanli, Hopkan, Dawish Ubazi, Diwan al-Tartanya, and Mersava in the area of Afrin from the Kurdish People's Protection Units, YPG. Amid reports that the YPG and the SAA have reached a deal over Afrin, Turkey has threatened to strike Syrian government forces should they enter Afrin to provide protection to the YPG. If the regime enters Afrin to clear out the YPG, then there is no problem. If they are entering to provide protection to the YPG, then no one can stop Turkey or Turkish soldiers, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said on February the 19th. On the same day, reports once again appeared that government units are set to enter the Afrin area soon.
With Turkey trying to oust the Kurds from northern Syria's Afrin, both sides appear to be looking to strike an unlikely alliance. Damascus is reportedly in talks to assist the Kurds, while Ankara has said it would welcome any effort by the Syrian army to drive out what it calls terrorists from Afrin. Murad Gazdiev explains.
Afrin has turned into a bloodbath, a grinding war that is claiming dozens, if not hundreds, of lives every day. Turkish soldiers, their rebel allies, die in droves. Near 1,000 dead, reportedly. The Kurds, the YPG, PKK or PYD, some estimates put their losses at over 1,000 in a matter of weeks. The Turkish operation in Afrin isn't so much an advance as it is a meat grinder. This is senseless, yet, according to the belligerents, necessary slaughter, and it's hurting everyone.
We can cooperate with any side that lends us a helping hand in light of the barbaric crimes and the international silence.
There is a possible solution, one that could stop this madness. A man, the least likely candidate of all.
Assad is clearly a terrorist and has carried out state terrorism. There is no peace in Syria, and there cannot be any peace with Assad in power.
The regime says we will hand over our regions to the region's army. We will never hand them over.
That was then, before the US-led anti-ISIS coalition began butchering each other. Now, when everyone's dying and they need him, Assad isn't such a bad guy anymore.
If the regime is entering there to cleanse the PKK and PYD, then there are no problems. However, if it comes in to defend the YPG...
Absolutely brutal pictures and reports coming out of Syria the last couple days. I'll warn our viewers, some of the pictures that are about to pop up on your screen are extremely disturbing. The Assad regime, backed by Russia, has just unloaded on the main rebel-held area outside of Damascus. Eastern Ghouta, as the area is known, has faced an intense bombing campaign for weeks now. Hundreds have been killed, but the Assad regime has intensified the shelling in recent days, and at least 98 people, including dozens of children and women, have been killed, adding to the awful situation for the some 400,000 Syrians living there. The United Nations says that there is a severe shortage of food, water, and basic supplies. The French Foreign Ministry is saying the bombing is a serious violation of international law. But like Sandra, we've seen the last few years, there is a real disagreement about what to do. The Assad regime is backed by Iran and Russia. Turkey really cares about the ambitions of the Kurds, and the Trump administration, like the Obama administration, doesn't really know what to do about the Assad regime and the war there against the rebels.
الله أكبر 9/2/2018 قصف الطائرات الحربية على مدينة دوما. اجيت ضب يا أخي. الله أكبر الله أكبر استهداف فريق الدفاع المدني. الله أكبر الله أكبر. صفان شايف يشيل على ما فيها يشيل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر. استهداف مدينة دوما غارات من قبل الطيران الحربي. الله أكبر الله أكبر 9/2/2018 استهداف مدينة دوما بغارات من قبل الطيران الحربي. الله أكبر الله أكبر. حسين بالمحمل. عندك مكانك قاعدة هون هدف الشيعة. الله أكبر استهداف مدينة دوما بغارات من قبل الطيران الحربي.
عليها. هدي ابو خضار. كمل نشوفها وينها. يلا لف لها من الشارع، لف لها. ايه بنافذه. امورنا بخير. طمن لي على ابو خضر بس. يا ابو خضر اخي معه امورنا بخير. هدي واقف خلينا ننزل. مع اخي معك. ايه انا بجديده